Robert Hiatt, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. It's good to see you, David.
It's good to see you. I guess we could see each other in person. You are currently in Lower Manhattan, right? And I'm in Brooklyn. I could take a brief subway ride to see you in person, but we're doing this digital thing, and so but it's. I know you're a New Yorker. You moved to New York. What year?
I moved here in 1988, right after graduation.
Right. Well, I'm glad you mentioned 88. Let's disclose our relationship before we do this interview. So we both graduated from Punahou School in 1988. We were good friends, and we've remained friends for 35 years or so. We both live in New York. Let's be honest, we don't see each other as often as we should, despite the short distance between where you and I live. But we've remained friends. But despite that, Rob, I'm still going to ask you all the hardball questions. So I hope that you are prepared.
I am prepared. Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, well, why don't we just start with your family? And I'll just ask, who are the Hyatts?
Sure. As you may know, I don't know. I'm adopted. I was adopted at birth. So my parents are Gerald and Carolyn Hiatt, and they picked me up at Wahiawa General Hospital in the pineapple fields and took me home with them. My father was a physician in Honolulu. My mother was a school teacher. And, my father grew up in Hawaii. So he was from Hawaii. He went to Punahou, as did my aunt and uncle, and most of my cousins and my siblings. Right? So we had kind of a tradition at Punahou. His mother was a teacher at Punahou way back in the, I guess, 50s. And my mother is from California. She's from Los Angeles, and she met my father when they were students at Berkeley. And they ended up back in Hawaii, and that's kind of how that started.
When did the Hyatts get to Hawaii? Why did your dad grow up in Hawaii?
His father was a marine biologist, so he kind of around World War II or thereafter, he was sort of involved in the Marshall Islands project, some of the stuff they were doing down there, not the nuclear testing, but studying the ramifications on wildlife after. So, and I think at the time he was affiliated with Berkeley, but he loved it. And so he took a position at the University of Hawaii. And his name was Robert Hiatt. He actually ended up becoming the president of the University of Hawaii in the 60s for a brief period of time. And their family homestead was in Waimanalo. And my mother ended up there because of him.
What is your mother's maiden name?
Macintosh. So she's a nice Scottish girl who I don't think probably ever imagined she would end up in Hawaii, but she loved it.
So your grandfather was a university president. Your father was a physician. Those are some accomplishments. So these are some academically inclined people. Was that the impression you got of your family growing up, that these were people who highly valued education and sort of professional achievement?
Yes, and it was good, but it was also somewhat limiting, right? There was never this idea that there was anything else to do. I didn't come to that realization until much later in life, but you always sort of wonder about the path not taken. But that's a long way of answering yes, it was very important.
Tell me about your siblings.
I have a sister, Heather. She's 14 months younger than me, and she was a year behind me in Punahou. And I have a brother, Tad, who's 10 years younger than me, and he was 10 years behind me at Punahou. So I didn't really know Tad much growing up. I was out of the house by the time I was 18 and he was 10. We didn't have much in common. So we've become much closer later in life.
Were they adopted as well?
They were not. They were not. What often happens, right, is couples have trouble getting pregnant, so they adopt. Then when the pressure comes off, they immediately become pregnant. So I see that a lot just in my work and in my experience in life. But that's what happened, which is why Heather came behind so quickly.
Can you describe the series of decisions, or at least as it was told to you, on the parts of your parents to adopt you?
They wanted a family, and I think they were struggling to do that. And this was before all of the tech that people can use. So my father sort of had an inside track with the woman who was the head of the Hawaii Adoption Bureau, whatever it was at the time, and he managed to hook himself up with a woman who was pregnant. She was at the university. She knew she wanted to give her child up to adoption, and she had this idea of the kind of family she wanted to have the kid adopted into. My parents sort of checked the appropriate boxes, and that I think is how that happened. But they had wanted a child for a while, and then they really were, quite frankly, blessed with me, which was the greatest blessing they could have had in their life. I'm sure they would say that.
Well, they hit the jackpot.
They really did hit the lottery, which is good for them. Congratulations.
Your parents are haole and you are not. Did that ever come up as a topic when you're growing up?
Constantly, mostly by me. If many people watching this went to Punahou and will know Heather, so they'll know she looks like you, Dave. She's about as white a girl with red hair as there could be. And she resembled my mom and my dad. And then my brother came along and he was a blonde white kid. So I was definitely the odd man out. And nobody made me feel that way. Not my friends, not my family, but because I wasn't a blind person, I could see, right? So it it certainly it bothered me, right? It was something that I was aware of more than I think they were aware of, but it did bother me.
What age do you remember being bothered or beginning to be bothered by this, or noticing it?
Probably as soon as I was aware that people would say things like, gee, you don't look like your sister, or you don't look like your mom and dad. And those would be like perfectly innocent questions, right? Looking back now, I don't ascribe any ill will or malintent to it. But like when you're 4, it's a messed up question, right? And so it's unhelpful to someone who's forming their identity and trying to bond in a family. And again, it was completely external, right? None of this came from within, but it was a factor. So, which is fairly common with adopted kids who don't look like their adopted families. And adopted kids have all sorts of issues. And then the older I got, I realized that adopted kids have all sorts of issues, but they're different issues. And now that I'm 55, I realize that all kids have issues, whether you're adopted or not, right? I mean, like it's not unique to anything. It's just a function of growing up. It was just a different complexity. I could have been beaten, right? I could have been malnourished. There's a lot of things that could have happened if you weren't adopted, but it's really not the worst thing. So hopefully I'm more mature about it now. But I'll be honest, I was not so comfortable with it all the way maybe through my 30s, right? It took me some time.
How do you think that discomfort manifested itself, especially when you were a kid? Were there coping mechanisms? Did you interact with people in a certain way?
I think I was not as nice as I could have been to Heather and Tad. And maybe that was, well, I'm sure it was resentment and jealousy. Not for them being them, but just I didn't look like them, right? I didn't look like I fit in. And again, I feel I need to say it, not because of anything they ever did.
Right.
It just you look in a mirror or you look at a family photo, and even today it's almost comical, right? It's like these white people, and then like it's the Filipino gardener's son is there, and that's my own hang up, right? But I mean, it's the juxtaposition. It's like one of these things doesn't belong, right? And it was clear. So I'm sure that I would manifest that towards them, and I regret it. And I told them. I think they forgive me. I hope they do. They both talk to me, right? So
You were growing up in Hawaii, which has a majority population of people of Asian or Pacific Island descent. Did that sort of soften the discomfort that you were surrounded by people who at least were sort of in the same ballpark of what you looked like?
it did, because certainly being in Hawaii, and Hawaii wasn't quite the melting pot that everyone says it was. I was very racially aware of things that were going on in society, but it wasn't directed the way that it would be directed in other places, right? So we remember at Punahou, there was great stratification of race, right? And you could see that in the lunchroom. Typically the Haole guys and the Hapa would mix pretty well, right? And the more insular communities were among the Asians, right? So there was the Japanese people and the Chinese people. And again, there of course were exceptions to this, but you were aware of it, but it was inclusive with Hapa Howleys, right? So there wasn't, you were aware of race and you sort of felt it, but it wasn't this sinister thing. It was just you were aware of it and you sort of hung out in your cliques that happened to be defined in large part racially.
Can you think of memories with your family or anything that really pins you in the 70s?
Memory wise, my parents got divorced when I was relatively young. So my life was sort of, in sixth grade. I guess that's relatively young. My life is sort of, I think of it as before and after, right? And not in being a happy period or a sad period. It just became different. Um,
Did you live with your mom after the divorce?
I did.
Well,
And the same house and the same, it was just my dad wasn't there, right? So it was a different, and that changes everything, right? That just the influence of having a man around and being the oldest, then I sort of de facto became the male influence in a house, which is probably not good for anybody when you're a relatively immature, bratty 12-year-old with issues about being adopted, right? I mean, it was, I'm sure it wasn't the best.
what did your parents tell you about why they got divorced?
You know, my my dad left. He didn't want to be married to my mom anymore. It broke my mom's heart. Um, it was sad, right? It was a very sad thing to see, especially when it wasn't a mutual parting of the ways, right? To see that up close. One person just clearly wasn't in love with the other, and the other was just deeply hurt and still in love, right? At that time with my dad. So that imprints on you, right? And it was a useful lesson to learn about your parents, that they're people, that they will disappoint you, that they are greatly imperfect. It was constantly made clear to me by my mom and dad that they loved us, all of us, that we had nothing to do with it, that this is just something they needed to do. And that was useful too, but it was very humanizing, right? After that, I no longer saw my parents, as sort of these perfect people. I saw them as very deeply flawed people. Maybe that caused me to lose some respect for both of them. I don't know whether that was good or bad. It certainly maybe made me cynical, or less hopeful in people generally. It's carried through my life, right? Like I don't think I've changed on that.
So let's talk about just you being a kid. Like, what kind of stuff did you do? Like, you were in Hawaii. You went to Punahou Elementary. What were some favorite memories that kind of you think fondly of back in your childhood?
You know, it was just looking back, it was such a great place to grow up, right? You're never aware of your childhood, obviously, until it's over. But growing up in Hawaii, going to Punahou, knowing kids like you, right? It was great, right? I mean, it was a different time. It was more innocent. We were a lot more free to do things, right? Nobody had phones. Our parents would let us just go and just be back for dinner, and we could ride our bikes around. And it was, it wasn't anything particularly unique, but just it was so, I feel like it was so much more free than kids are today. My family was a member of the Kaneohe Yacht Club. So at like a really young age, me and Taylor, right? We'd take our little sunfishes out from the yacht club to all the way to Chinaman's Hat and back. I don't know that anyone would let their sixth grader do that today. That would freak them out, right? It's just too dangerous. It's too far. Anything could happen. You're on the ocean. And any Gen X or our age has a similar story, right? That would be exactly how it would be. Like, you'd be dropped off somewhere at Ala Moana or anywhere, right? At 10 in the morning, and okay, this is the pickup spot, and that's the plan, and I'll pick you up in 7 or 8 hours. Have fun with your little crew of other 13 and 14-year-olds, right? And there was no checking in, there was no texting, what's up, no selfies. It's just how it was, right? And that's changed.
So you were at Punahou starting in what, first grade or?
1976 is when I started at Punahou in first grade.
Yeah.
Um,
So you were there all the way through 1988.
yes.
No breaks,
No
but
breaks.
entering the academy, as they called high school, how did you feel? What was the general vibe like for you?
Punahou taught you how to think in a very critical and uncomfortable way, and that's the reason why it was, of all the educational institutions I've attended, it was the most valuable. Not because of any specific thing I learned or any specific teacher I had, but the ethos, right, and the way it taught me to think. And it was okay to think critically and be pushed and be pushed to uncomfortable places. Other people would challenge your ideas and you had to defend them, and you could do the same. That was the value of Punahou, just the appreciation of intellectual curiosity and embracing it. Very valuable.
Can you talk about sort of your experience with, whatever you want to call it, partying, illicit beverages? What was your modus operandi?
We go to Foodland, right? I think the word was that the Foodland on Kapiolani Boulevard was the easiest place to buy alcohol. And we would find the guy, right? I don't want to name any names, but there was one guy who was the oldest guy, kind of looked the oldest, and he would go load up. We'd all give him money, right? Everybody would pony up in the kitty $5 or $10, and you get like $40 and go buy the goods, right? and then we would head right on Tantalus to that old abandoned water tank, right? We park the cars and we'd go up there and drink. And it was a great spot. It was like $1 million view, right? Remember that? Like, it was right on Tantalus, kind of above Punahou, unobstructed view all the way from like Pearl Harbor to Diamond Head. And of course, we didn't appreciate it, although we sort of appreciated it. I guess it was because we would go there. But it's just crazy, right? Like, we weren't like in someone's mom's basement. We were like, again, it was just Hawaii in the 80s, right? And then of course we'd all get in our cars and drive down winding Tantalus to go home. But
do you remember going to just kind of general high school parties, kind of larger mixed parties? How did you do at those parties? How did you perceive yourself? How do you think you were perceived?
the group I was in, as you know, we weren't like probably the cruelest kids, but Punahou really didn't work that way. We certainly weren't the lamest kids, right? We got invited to all the parties. It was great because that's where you could interact with a larger circle, right? And certainly girls. I mean, maybe there are house parties today. I wouldn't let my kids have a house party. My mom would. I mean, it was just weird. Parenting was also different, right? I mean, I don't know if you had let your kids have house parties, but there's no way, just for the liability, right? There's just absolutely no way I'm having 40 kids over drinking in my house. That is a hard no. Absolutely not. I can't even believe it happened.
What kind of a profile do you think you cut at Punahou in the academy? How did you feel about yourself?
I knew I wasn't my best self. Not that I'm a skinny guy now, but I was a little chubby in high school. You may recall, I'm sure people will, right? So I wasn't, I was around a lot of guys who, quite frankly, were really in really good shape, right? Athletes, right? I'm talking about in my group, right? We're playing, running track, doing whatever. So I was aware. Yeah, I know. I kind of knew that I probably didn't look my best, and yeah, I was fine with it though. Like I was, yeah. I mean, even though I gained this insight in life, I knew that it was okay because I was always aware that it was transitory, right? Like, and maybe that was from my parents' divorce, right? Everything is transitory.
1988, when we were all graduating, what was your frame of mind? You were 18 years old. You had been accepted to NYU to go to college in quite a different place. What was on your mind?
Tremendously excited. Other than myself, you were the only kid I knew that had a map of Manhattan in their bedroom, right? Remember that? So I don't know why I had this idea that New York City was just going to be the best place ever. And I visited a couple times, right, on summer vacation with my family, but I couldn't wait to get there because I sort of had this idea that New York City was a Woody Allen movie, right? And his movies in the 80s were as much love letters to New York City as they were anything else, right? They were filmed beautifully, shot beautifully, and they just made New York City just look like the most amazing place. I really appreciate that my parents let me do that. It was as far away from Hawaii as you could get without leaving the country. And it was far away culturally, right? And I got no pushback from either of them.
I usually don't go past 1988, but in your case, I'm going to make an exception because I think it ties back to something that we started with. Did you ultimately end up connecting with the family that gave you up for adoption?
I did, very briefly, right? Just mostly out of curiosity. It was when I was in college. I met my birth parents, who, interestingly enough, had ended up getting married, and they had two other kids who were my full-blooded biological siblings. But you can't have two homes, you know what I mean? Like it was just and again, I was 19, and it also was good for me to know how lucky I was. They had a whole different type of life than I was used to, right? it showed me the blessings of my life, which was helpful to me through the journey, right? To know how lucky I was to be adopted by the family I was adopted into. I would not have had anywhere near the life I've had, and I'm having, had I not been adopted.
Who were they?
She was at the time, she was a student, a Filipino woman, a student at the University of Hawaii, and he was in the military, right? And I guess they met in Hawaii, and I think they probably just had like an affair that turned into something real. He was a Hungarian dude. So my ethnicity is I'm half kind of like Eastern European Ashkenazi Jew and half Filipino, which is what this is what it looks like to be half Jewish, half Filipino.
Looks pretty good. That's a good combo, man. Good job.
Yeah, I mean, and it is like in Hawaii, it's what a lot of people think, right? Like that's the thing. Growing up in Hawaii, this is kind of a common look. You dark hair, but straight, and straight dark hair and darker skin, dark eyes. I remember this quick. So I never experienced racism in Hawaii ever, but I was out of law school. My dad and I went to Cincinnati to see a Bengals game. So we were on the street walking back to the hotel, and a truck rolls by, and somebody yells at, "Get out of here, you stupid Mexican!" And I looked around, like, who are they talking to? And then I realized they were talking to me. They thought I was a Mexican because I guess, and anyone with with a skin. That was the first time. It was crazy. It was hilarious. I couldn't believe it. But that was the first time. Never in Hawaii, in Cincinnati, Ohio.
What is your relationship with either being Filipino or being Ashkenazi Jew? Do you have any thoughts or feelings in either direction?
I do. Growing up in Hawaii, being a Filipino had like a connotation to it, right? Kind of like gardener or like worker. And here on the East Coast, right, it's a professional class, right? Doctors and nurses and whatnot. I didn't know that. I have no connection really to the culture. And obviously, I wasn't raised in a Jewish family, but it's not something I had to grow up with. But your ethnicity is also who you are, right? So I do wish maybe I had a little bit more that I could be in touch with that. But other than going to karaoke, that's about as far as I do with my Filipino stuff. And I'm not very good at that. Not very good.
I've been to karaoke with you. I thought you were great. So
There you go. Thank you very much.
Final question. You are now a lawyer and your specialty is family law, sometimes referred to as being a divorce lawyer. Do you have any lessons from your childhood, from the, I guess, realpolitik worldview that perhaps you picked up a little bit when you were a kid, that you share with your clients who are probably frequently in an emotionally distressed state? What's something that you pull out of your, I guess, your past to help give perspective to whatever they're going through?
The word you just said, which is a big word that I use in life, it's perspective, right? Like a little time and distance from any event will help you understand it. So everything will generally work out the way it's supposed to work out. So whatever struggle you're in, like while you're in it, it can be horrible, right? I mean, it just could feel like the worst possible thing you're going through. But most people make it, and everyone has a story, right? And if you listen to old people talk, they can talk about some horrific things, but they can talk about it because they made it through. That's why I tell them you'll make it through, right? You'll make it through, like, and nothing is quite as bad with perspective as it feels when you're going through it.